times if we first of all have to compare our projects, and one project generates 2 cash flowers and the second project generates 11 cash flowers. So why in this case certainly this method can't be realized, and it means in practice we should repeat our project 11 times, and certainly it's not necessary, and we can't use this technique in this case. But we can choose, we may choose the second method, infinite chain repeat method. And according to this method, we are ignoring the amount of repetition for our project. We are ignoring how many times should we repeat our project, and what's about the minimum common amount of our cash flowers. We are placing our projects in conditions of infinity. And our project will generate cash flowers in the case that our common or smallest common amount of repetition leads to infinity. Certainly this method is simply comparing with the first one, and in this method the number of terms in the formula for calculating our net present value in the situation when our amount of periods leads to infinity can be calculated using the following formula. Our net present value, if the amount of repetition leads to infinity, can be calculated as net present value in real scenario, our expected net present value, multiply 1 plus cost of capital to the extent E or I, where I it's a real amount of cash flowers generated by our project, and divided 1 plus cost of capital to the extent I, or to the extent real amount of cash flowers minus 1. And so why, if we are reflecting this model for our project A, and our real amount of cash flowers, as we approved earlier, 2 cash flowers and 3 cash flowers for project B. Now I am putting all these meanings in our formula, so why it will be 3.3 multiply 1.1, 10% is the discount factor, to the extent 2, where 2 it's our real amount of cash flowers, divided 1 plus 10% to the extent 2 minus 1. It's our well-known formula of infinitely decreasing geometric progression. And in this case, if our project A is finished and will be repeated again, net present value of this project equals 19.01. As about our project B, net present value in the situation of infinity equals 21.71. And certainly this method ignores the amount of repetition, ignores the smallest common amount of cash flowers, but using our formula of decreasing geometric progression, you can compare the projects in the same conditions, in the same scenario. Is it clear, this method? Or perhaps any questions for the previous method, if the questions appeared? Dear colleagues, is it clear, this method? All's good? Let's continue. Clear, good, thanks a lot. And now let's continue the next method. And the last method to be used in practice when we have to compare our projects with an equal implementation period. The third method is named as equivalent annuity or equal payment method. And according to our equivalent annuity or equal payment method, we have to replace our cash flows for the project by the equivalent annuity. In other words, we are missing all our cash outflows, cash inflows, and we are replacing all our cash flows by the equivalent annuity, And in this case, first of all, we have to compare the meanings of our equivalent annuity and the project which is associated with a higher level of equivalent annuity will be chosen in practice. Perhaps you can calculate present value of our annuity, present value of equivalent annuity, and compare present value of equivalent annuity to choose the best project. How should we realize this method in practice? First of all, we have to calculate net present value of one-time implementation of each project. And we calculated this net present value earlier. We have to calculate our net present value of one-time implementation of our project. Then, for each project, an equivalent fixed-term annuity is founded, the present value of which is equal to the net present value of the project. In other words, the amount of the annuity payment is calculated. It's a very long sentence, but on the second step, we have to find the equivalent annuity, present value of which equals net present value of our project. We have found equivalent annuity, present value of this annuity. So why? It means we have to multiply our equivalent annuity by the discount coefficient, by the discount factor, financial management 4, based on our rate and cost of capital, and based on our period of realizing the project. And our equivalent annuity multiply the discount factor, financial management 4, equals net present value of the project. Then we can compare our equivalent annuity, or we can find the present value. Let's suppose that our equivalent annuity can be replaced by a perpetual annuity, and we'll find present value of our perpetual annuity, and we'll compare present value of this annuity. Good. For our projects, this method will be reflected in the following way. As we calculated earlier, net present value of our project A equals 3.3. It's our present value. Now we have to find an equivalent annuity. Present value of this annuity equals net present value of the project. So why? To find this equivalent annuity, I'll divide net present value by the discount coefficient, financial management 4. And for us, it will be 3.3 divided by which coefficient? The table of our discount factors is presented, divided by which coefficient? Dear colleagues, which coefficient? You can use the microphone. 10% discount rate in our case. Divided by which coefficient? How do you think? What's the period? What's the amount of periods of generating cash flows for the first period, for the first project? Just a second, I can't. Good, 2, exactly 2, thanks a lot. Just a second, have problems with computer. And so why it will be 3.3 divided by 2 periods and 10% divided by 1.73 divided by 1.73. As about our project B, net present value of project B equals 5.4. And when we are finding our equivalent annuity, it will be our 5.4, our equivalent annuity equals net present value 5.4 divided our discount factor for 3 periods and 10% divided 2.48. And so why the equivalent annuity for our project B equals 2.17. And the next step is not obligatory step, but you can realize the last point of this method and replace your equivalent annuity by perpetuity annuity and find present value of this annuity. Present value of annuity, it will be our annuity 1.9 divided by 10%. It's our well-known formula of perpetual annuity. Present value in first situation equals 19. In second situation equals 21.7. And certainly, after placing our projects in similar conditions, in the same conditions as you can notice, we'll receive our project B is more preferable compared with project A. There are 3 main methods of comparative analysis of project with an equal implementation period, and we started all these methods. Is it clear, these methods and this methodology? If you have any questions, you can ask me. If it's necessary to translate something in Russia, please highlight what should I translate in Russia. And now let's copy the document from our files, Seminar 6. Скопируйте, пожалуйста, из файла Семинар 6 документ, и мы с ним сейчас будем работать. Good. And this file, Seminar 6, includes different cases on our basic topic on companies valuation, on asset valuation. And let's start. I think you have copied this file. And now let's start our work with this file. And we have the first question, we have the first task. Target company, PLC, has agreed to be taken over by purchasing company, PLC, via a share exchange whereby target shareholders will each receive 1 share of purchasing for every 2 they hold. No synergetic gains in earnings are expected to arise from the takeover. Given the following pre-takeover details of the 2 companies and assuming the market assigns a price-earnings ratio of 19 to the post-takeover company, how will the wealth of shareholders of target and the purchasing have changed after the takeover? And we have the information about our share price, our PE ratio, shares authorized and shares issued. Good. We have to determine the changes in wealth of our shareholders after the takeover. After the takeover. Good. Dinara, in files of our group, seminar 6, did you find? In files of our groups. Dear colleagues, did you find this document in files? In documents of our group, investment analysis? Dear colleagues, did you find the document? Please write your answer. Yes, good. In our docs. In this case, we have to find the changes in our wealth. And to start this task, I am proposing you, first of all, to determine market value of our companies before the deal, and then after the deal, and then find the changes in our wealth. And then find the changes of our wealth. First of all, I'm proposing you to find the market value. Of our first company. Of our first company purchasing. How could we find the market value of our first company? What are your proposals of finding our market value of the first company, of the company purchasing? How will we find the value? What are your proposals? It's necessary to gain the points. Good. Multiplying share price, shares outstanding. Mikhail, thanks a lot for your answer. Exactly. In other words, it will be 3 multiply 5 million. 3 pounds per share multiply 5 million shares outstanding. 5 million shares issued. And so why it will be 15 million for the first case. And if we are finding our market value of target company before our M&A, before our takeover deal, it will be 1.5 multiply 1 million shares. 1.5 multiply 1 million shares. It will be the market value of our target company before our takeover, before our deal. Good. Now I can propose you to find our combined earnings. Combined earnings. How could we find our combined earnings in this context? How do you think? Based on which parameters should we find our combined earnings? Based on which parameters should we find our combined earnings? How do you think? Pay ratio, Mikhail, thanks a lot. Based on our pay ratio, and could you start this formula based on our pay ratio? Combined, it means the sum of two companies, of the first company purchasing and of the second company target. But could you start this formula perhaps for purchasing company? Using pay ratio, certainly I can agree with you, but how? We have to find the global meaning of our earnings. We can find the common meaning of our earnings. Mikhail, How would you start, or how should we start calculation of our combined earnings? Calculations, good. Earning per share, share price divided pay ratio, exactly, and multiply amount of shares, exactly. It will be, as we have market price to earning equals 20. We have to find our earnings. In other words, it will be 3 pounds divided 20, our coefficient, and multiply amount of shares issued, multiply 5 million, plus 1.5 divided 10, the same. As we know pay ratio, as we know share price, we can find our earnings. We can find our earning for each share. And then we have to multiply amount of shares and multiply 1 million. So why our combined earnings equals 0.9. Good. Then multiply by the number of shares. Exactly, Mikhail. Thanks a lot for your answer. And as the next step, let's find the market value of global company. Market value after our takeover deal, after mergers and acquisitions. After takeover. How could we find our market value of our company after takeover deal? How could we find our market value after takeover deal? How do you think? How do you think? How could we find our takeover market value after takeover deal? To tell the truth, let's read together the conditions of this task, giving the following pre-takeover details of the two companies and assuming the market assigns a price-earnings ratio of 19 to the post-takeover company. So why our P ratio after takeover equals 19. We found it our combined earnings, and so it will be our earnings multiply 19, and we'll find our market value after takeover. We'll find our market value after takeover. Good. And now we can find our target purchasing. Let's start on purchasing. Our purchasing change in wealth or purchasing wealth change. Purchasing wealth change. How could we find our purchasing wealth change? It's quite necessary to find a new amount of shares. It's quite necessary to find a new amount of shares. Let's read the conditions for our amount of shares. Target Company PLC has agreed to be taken over by Purchasing Company PLC via a share exchange whereby target shareholders will each receive 1 share of purchasing for every 2 they hold. In this case, we assume a new issue of shares of purchasing company, a new SPO of purchasing company. So what's about the amount of shares of purchasing company in the market? How could we calculate a new amount of shares? Your proposals. How could we calculate a new amount of shares to realize our takeover? Let's suppose our purchasing company realized the new issue of shares, and the total amount of shares after this deal will be. How could we calculate? It will be 5 million plus what? If target shareholders will each receive 1 share of purchasing for every 2 they hold. Multiply 1.5 million total. Unfortunately, I can't agree with you. 1 million divided by 2 as 1 million of old shares of Target, and our shareholders of Target will receive 1 new share of purchasing to 2 old shares of Target. So why it will be 5 million plus 1 million divided by 2. 1 new share to 2 old shares. So why it will be 5.5. Good. 5.5. Good. It's amount. It's amount of shares. It's amount of stocks in economy. And now I am ready to calculate our purchasing wealth change. Our purchasing wealth change will be calculated in following way. It will be the weight of purchasing shareholders in total amount of shares, 5 divided 5.5. 5, the old amount of shares, the amount of old shareholders of purchasing company divided 5.5. Multiply market value after takeover. In other words, we are finding the part of market value distributed to all shareholders of purchasing and minus their wealth before the deal. And we are receiving positive meaning. The same calculation, but for our target wealth change. What about our target wealth change? How could we calculate the target wealth change? The same, our part of market value of purchasing company after takeover distributed to shareholders of target. But how could we calculate this meaning? How could we characterize this meaning? How could we calculate this meaning, or how could we characterize this meaning? Target wealth change. It will be a new wealth for target shareholders minus previous meaning of their wealth. But how could we calculate this meaning? How do you think? How could we calculate this meaning? How could we calculate this meaning? Using the same approach, using this method, using the same method, but how could we calculate this method? How could we calculate this meaning? How do you think? Dear colleagues, how do you think? What's the mechanism of calculation, the wealth of our previous shareholders of target company? What's the mechanism? What's about the market value distributed for shareholders of target company? How do you think? the same mechanism, the same construction we'll use. It will be the amount of shares are distributed to target company. It will be 0.5. In total amount of shares divided 5.5, multiply our total market value of the company and minus our market value of target company in previous scenario. And certainly it will be the gain, it will be the benefits for all shareholders, or both groups of shareholders have gained in this situation. Is it clear, this task? Oh, good. Exactly. Thanks a lot. But not plus, multiply. Multiply 17.1. Exactly, Veronica. Thanks a lot. Exactly. It's correct answer. Good, but only with one correction, 0.5. Yes, 0.5. The old shares will be transformed to a new shares. Why we divided 0.5, 5.5? Nastasia, let's repeat again, just a second. There is 1 million of old shares of target company, 1 million of old shares of target company. But after takeover, 2 shares of target company will be transformed to 1 share of purchasing company. All shares of target company will be transformed to 1 share of purchasing company. So why a new amount of shares for target shareholders became 500 or 0.5. That's all. That's all. Thanks a lot for your answer. And so why, when we are finding the wealth of our target shareholders, it means their weight in total amount of shares, 0.5, their weight in total amount of shares, divided 5.5, it's our global common amount of shares of purchasing company, multiply the same market value of our company and minus their previous wealth. And so why our both groups of shareholders have gained. Good. Now let's read the next part of our task. The second paper, Alpha PLC, is to acquire then the entire share capital of Beta PLC. The consideration is 1 new alpha. Be very attentive. The same conditions as in previous scenario. The consideration is 1 new alpha share for every 2 beta shares. The combined group will save £8,000 per annum on administration costs. Extracts from the pre-merger budgets of both companies are as follows. Alpha, beta. And the question, what is the new budgeted earnings per share of the enlarged alpha company? In other words, we can find, and we have to find our earning per share, our EPS, our coefficient EPS, First of all, we have to find our earnings. Could you propose me the mechanism of finding our earnings in this scenario? Could you propose me the mechanism of finding our earnings? How could we find our earnings? How could we find our earnings? How do you think? How could we find our earnings? We have profit after tax of Alpha company. Profit after tax Alpha company equals 200 plus what? profit after tax for Alpha company are added in our formula, plus what? We are finding total earnings of the combined 8 exactly. Plus 8, the combined group will save £8,000. So y plus 8 and plus profit after tax of Beta company plus 40. Before the deal and after the deal. We are comparing these results. After the deal, our combined company will save £8,000 per annum on administration costs. And so why certainly it will be the sum of profits of two companies and plus economy in administration costs. And it will be 248 and 48. Good. Thanks a lot, Nesta. And Veronica, thanks a lot. And now we have to calculate our amount of shares. Our shares. We have to calculate our amount of shares as we are finding our EPS, our earning per share. So why we have to find the amount of shares? As about amount of shares, very interesting question. First of all, let's read our conditions. Alpha PLC is to acquire the entire share capital of Beta PLC. The consideration is one new alpha share for every 2 beta shares. So why the first component? It will be 100, or in other words, 200 divided by 2. 2 beta shares to 1 alpha share. So why a new amount of alpha shares equals 100. And plus the amount of shares before the deal, plus the amount of shares for Alpha company before the deal. And in this situation, be very attentive, as nominal of our shares 50 pence. And the book value of our shares, the value based on which our shares are reflected in balance, £400,000. So why? To find the amount of our shares, we have to divide our 400,000, doesn't matter, to add our 3 zeros. To find the amount of shares of Alpha company before, it will be 400 divided 0.5. To find the amount, as the nominal of your share is 50 pence per share, so why to determine the amount of shares, it will be 800,000 shares outstanding. And so why the amount of shares in this context equals 900,000 shares. 100 after the deal and 800 before the deal. 900. And now we can find our EPS, our earning per share. Our earning per share, it will be our earnings divided by amount of our shares. 0.27. 0.27. Good. Unfortunately, I can't see the message, but I have received a sign about the message, but I did not see the message. Good. And for us, our earning per share will be calculated as our earnings divided by our shares, divided by amount of our shares. Good. And the last question for today, the last task for today is the following. Pointon PLC has made an offer of one of its shares for every 2 of Sidbury plc. Synergetic benefits from the merger would result in increased after-tax earnings of 4 million per annum. Extracts from the latest accounts of both companies are as follows. For Poynton and Sidbury plc. Assume that the price of Poynton plc shares rises by 20 pence after tax. After the merger. What will the price-earning ratio of the group? We have to find our P/E ratio of the group. P/E ratio of the group. And for this purpose, first of all, let's find our earnings. Let's find our earnings. What's about our earnings? How could we find our earnings? You can write in chat our earnings. Our earnings can be calculated. Good. Thanks a lot, Mikhail. Thanks a lot. It'll be 100 plus 20,000 plus our new, I can't say economy, but synergetic benefits, but our synergy, plus 4 million, exactly, 124, thanks a lot, 124. Then we have to calculate our earning per share as we have the price per share. Our EPS, earning per share. How could we calculate our earning per share? How do you think? How will we calculate our earning per share? How do you think? Earning per share. Our total earnings, but divided by what? Very, very simple. Divided by what? Our earning per each share. How could we calculate our earnings per shares? Our EPS. How could we calculate our earnings per share? What's about the amount of shares? What's about the amount of shares in the context of this task? The same has made an offer of one of its shares for every 2 Sidbury shares. What's about the common amount of shares? The total amount of shares? How do you think? The total amount of shares? What's about the total amount of shares? Dear colleagues, what's about the amount of shares? How do you think? What's about the amount of shares? How do you think? Good. Exactly, Mikhail, thanks a lot. Exactly. 400, exactly. Total shares, exactly, Mikhail. Thanks a lot for your answer. And for your solution, it'll be 400 plus 50 or 100 divided by 2. 2 old Sidbury shares for 1 new Poynton shares. And just a second. And it'll be 0.27. Now we have to find the price, but according to the conditions, assume that the price of Poynton plc shares rises by 20 pence after the merger. So while we can find the new price in this situation, we may find the price after this deal, after takeover. It'll be our 250 pence, the previous Poynton plc value, 2.5 pounds plus. Assume that the price of Poynton plc shares rises by 20 pence after the merger. So why 0.2? And the new price of share, it'll be 2.7, very simple. 2.7, the previous price plus 20 pence. And the last action, find the connection between our price to earnings. And our P ratio equals 9.8. 9.8. And the answer for this question. Good. Have you any questions on this task? Have you any comments on this task? Any questions for this task? P ratio equals 9.8 on this situation. And the last question for today, theoretical question. Good. No, good. Theoretical question. As your homework, I'm proposing you task number 5, task number 6, and task number 7. It's your homework, short homework to tell the truth. But as an example, let's read together. An independent account has produced the following valuations of a private company. Historical cost adjusted for changes in general purchasing power. Piecemeal net realizable value, cost of setting up an equivalent venture, economic value of the business, different meanings. Assume that the above valuations accord with the expectations and risk perceptions of the purchaser. The same attitude to risk, the same attitude to the future perspectives of our business. What is the maximum price that she should pay for the private company? How do you think? An independent account has produced the following valuations of a private company. And we have historical cost, piecemeal net realizable value, cost of setting up an equivalent venture, economic value of the business. And we have to find the maximum price that she should pay for the private company. Perhaps the historical cost, but this cost is connected with the previous period of time, and we won't be interested in this cost. As about piecemeal net realizable value, it means our liquidation value, but we believe in future of this company, we believe in perspectives of this company. And the correct answer is cost of setting up the equivalent venture. Just a second, I'll comment your proposal. The correct answer, cost of setting up an equivalent venture. And it means to create the same company. This method during our lectures we named as the method of substitute. To create the same company with the same level of utility. Task number 5, 6, and 7 is your homework. And now a few words to finish our task. Good.